back to SS Multimedia. I'm Naman Patil and I am going to be teaching your lesson. Today's objective is to understand and learn how to compare decimals. So the most important keywords are understand, learn. These aren't the most important, but they are important because you're going to know what you're going to be doing. And the most important is compare decimals. Okay, so just keep that in mind while we go through these problems. Okay, so while I'm talking about problems, let's do some practice. 0 and 7/10 and 0 and 67/100. So right here we can tell that 0 and 7/10 looks smaller if you align it in vertical form. So like 0.7 and 0.67. So it looks like there's one missing number here, right? So then we can add a 0 like I did over here, which does not change the value, it just makes it easier. So then we can see 0 and 70/100 is greater than 0 and 67/100, but this is actually 0 and 7/10. So adding that 0 made it much easier to compare. So now we know that the symbol looks like this. So 0 and 7/10 is greater than 0 and 67/100. Okay, so now if you just look at this, you should know that the answer. So 0 and 69/100 and 0 and 47/100. We know that 69 is greater than 47. Well, at least you should know that. 69 is greater than 47. So we know that 0 and 69/100 is greater than 0 and 47/100. Okay, so let me just erase those circles. Okay, so we got the answer to the second problem. Right? So now let's move on to the third problem. So we have 0 and 38/100 and 0 and 8/10. So we can do the same thing again. We can add that 0, that helpful little 0, after the 8. So then we know, now we see that it's 38 and 80. We should know that 80 is greater than 38. So we should write down the less than symbol. So the complete problem should be 0 and 38/100 is less than 0 and 8/10. Okay, so again, this little 0 helped us. So now we can move on to 0 and 61/100 and 0 and 3/10. Okay, so again, let's add our little helpful 0. Okay, and then let's compare it. So we know that 3 is about half of 6, and it's 30 and 61. So we know that 61 is greater than 30. So we know which symbol to put here. So now we know that 0 and 61/100 is greater than 0 and 3/10. We can take out that 0 to make it look like the actual problem. Okay, and let's move on to the next problem. So it's 0 and 59/100 and 0 and 98/100. So we can straight away see that 98 is greater than 59. So we know that 98 is greater. And we can tell that because there's no actual whole numbers. So we know that we can just keep it down to the hundredths place, or the decimal. Okay, so that we know the answer to this one, I'll just erase our work on the problem. Okay, so now that we got the answer for that one, let's move on to the next problem. 0 and 47/100 and 0 and 39/100. So we know that 47 is greater than 39. So we should be easily able to tell that 0 and 47/100 is greater than 0 and 39/100. Okay, so since we finished that one, make it look neat again. And let's move on to the next problem. So number 7, 0 and 40 hundredths and 0 and 4 tenths. Remember what we learned in numbers 1, 3, and 4? We learned that we can add a 0 to any of these tenths if we need to make it easier to compare. So this could be done here, remember, because 0 has no value. So we don't need that 0. It's just adding another value, another place value. Or yeah, and it doesn't have a value, but it's adding another place. So then since we took out that 0, we see that 0 and 4 tenths is remaining. And 0 and 4 tenths is on the other side too. So we know that this here is equals to. Okay? So let me just erase our work. You guys can keep your work if you want to. I'm just erasing it to make sure that you guys see the point of the problem, or you see the solution, or the answer. Okay, so now let's move on to the next problem. And straight away you see that these numbers are bigger. But that doesn't mean you change your process. Okay? So now we look at this number 0 and 398 thousandths and 0 and 379 thousandths. So we see that we can't compare the zeros, right? Then we see that we can't compare the 3's either because they both are equal. Then we move on to the 9 and the 7. So we see that the 9 is greater than the 7. So that also means that 398 is greater than 379. So we know that this is the symbol that we need, the greatest than symbol. So now we know that 398 thousandths is greater than 379 thousandths. So these are the first 8 problems that we have done. Okay, so now let's start doing some problems with bigger numbers. So we did one in the last page, which is the number 8, the last one. So now we're gonna do more like those. So more like that one. So we're gonna do 5 more problems with bigger numbers. But remember, bigger numbers shouldn't be scaring you because you still do the same process. Okay. So now let's start off with the first one. Okay, 0 and 432 thousandths and 0 and 498 thousandths. So we straight away know that 0 and 0 can't be compared with each other because they're equal. And then 4 and 4 can't be compared with each other either because they're equal again. But then now we see that there's a 3 and a 9. And you should know that 3 is less than 9. Okay? So that also means that 0 and 432 thousandths is less than 0 and 498 thousandths. So now we can move on to the next problem. So again, we see that we can't compare the zeros because the zeros are equal. So then we move on to the tens place. And then we see that 4 and 2 are tenths. And we also should know that 4 is greater than 2. So that also means we can find the answer now. Right after I erase this, okay? So now that also means we can find the answer. So since 457 is greater than 298, the same should apply to the hundredths or the thousandths place too, or the thousandths number, the decimal number. Okay, so we know that's the answer because 0 and 457 thousandths is greater than 0 and 298 thousandths. Okay, so now let's move on to the third problem. 0 and 597 thousandths and 0 and 789 thousandths. Straight away again we can see that we can't compare the zeros, so we move on to the tens place. Then we see what our tens are. 5 and 7. We know that 7 is greater than 5. So that also should mean that 0 and 789 thousandths is greater than 0 and 597 thousandths. Because again, 789 is greater than 597, and the same should apply to the decimals. Okay, so now let's move on to the fourth problem. 0 and 679 thousandths and 0 and 679 679 no 6790 ten thousandths. Okay, so that means, again, we learned in the last page that we can add a 0 to a number, but then that 0 won't make the value different. So we can see that one second. Okay, so then we can see that we have added a 0 at the end, but remember, a 0 has no value, so we can cross that 0 out, and then we can start comparing. So we can't compare the zeros, can't compare the sixes or the tenths, can't compare the hundreds either because they're both equal, can't compare the thousandths either. So we know that these two numbers are equal. Now let's move on to the next problem. 0 and 999 thousandths and 0 and 999 thousandths. You guys should know this like straight away, that these two should be equal because both of the numbers are the same. But we'll just go through the same process again. Okay, so 0 is equal on both sides. The tenths is equal on both sides because they both are 9. Hundreds are both equal because they both are 9. And thousands are both equal because they both are 9. So we know that 0 and 999 thousandths is equal to 0 and 999 thousandths, which should not be a surprise. Okay, and I think I forgot to read out this one. 0 and 679 thousandths is equal to 0 and 676,790 ten thousandths. Okay, so we're done with that. So now it's time to show me what you've got, or at least what you've learned. Okay, so now is the time to pause the video and start working out all of these 6 problems here. Okay, so I'll be waiting. Pause the video and work it out. Okay, I hope you've paused the video and worked each of these problems out and wrote down your answers. If you haven't, write them down quickly and come back. Okay, should be back by now. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you the answers to this. I'm not going to explain it out, or actually I will explain it for you guys. Okay, so let's start. So 0 and 45 hundredths and 0 and 4 tenths. Remember, we can add that trusty 0 at the end of the 4 to show 40 and 45. We know that 40 is less than 45, or 45 is greater than 40, so we can have that symbol there, the greater than symbol. So 0 and 45 hundredths is greater than 0 and 4 tenths. Okay, so now we can move on to the next one. 0 and 40 hundredths and 0 and 34 tenths. Hundredths. Okay, so now we can obviously see that we can't compare the zeros. Okay, but we can compare the tenths because 4 and 3 are different numbers, and we can see that 4 is greater than 3. So we know that, and we know that 40 is greater than 34. So we know that 0 and 40 hundredths is greater than 0 and 34 hundredths. Let's move on to the next one. 0 and 347 thousandths, 0 and 456 thousandths. So let's start doing our same procedure again. We can't compare the zeros. Okay? and then but we can compare the tens place because both these numbers are different, 3 and 4. And we know that 4 is greater than 3, so we can also tell, and we also know that 456,000 or 456 is greater than 347, and the same should apply to decimals. Okay, so we can write down the less than sign. Okay, so then we can know that 0 and 347 thousandths is less than 0 and 456 thousandths. Let's move on to the next one now. 0 and 345 thousandths and 0 and 795 thousandths. So let's do the same procedure again. We can't compare the zeros because they both are equal. So then we move on to the tens. And that's where we see the 7 and the 3. We should all know that 7 is greater than 3. So, and 795 and 300 is greater than 345. So we should write down, you should have written down the less than sign. Okay, so 0 and 345 thousandths is less than 0 and 795 thousandths. Okay, so let's move on to the next problem. 0 and 56 hundredths and 0 and 54 hundredths. Okay, so let's do the procedure again, but you guys should know the answer to this already. So we can't compare the zeros because they both are equal. We can't compare the 5 either, or the tens place, because they both are equal, 5. But then when we move on to the hundreds place, we see 6 and 4. And you all should know 4 is less than 6. So the answer is the greater sign. So the answer to the problem is 0 and 56 hundredths is greater than 0 and 54 hundredths. Okay, so let's move on to the last problem. We have 0 and 5,000 10,000ths and 0 and 5/10ths. So, like we learned in the first page, or the first problems, or the first few problems, we learned that we can add a 0 at the end, but the 0 won't have any value to it. So, we can do the same thing here, because the same thing applies to any of the decimals. So, again, if we add, so say there's 1, 2, 3 zeros here, you can add 3 zeros here too. And remember, the zeros have no value to them. So then that makes it equal. Both the numbers equal. Or we can just cross out these zeros because they have no value to them. So that also shows that these two numbers are equal. So now we can cross those out. So now we know that these two numbers are equal, these two decimals. So since we're done with that now, remember to comment down below your answers if you got 6 out of 6 or 0 out of 6. If you got 0 out of 6, it's okay. You're still doing good. You're working hard. Keep working hard and you'll get that 6 out of 6. If you got 6 out of 6, well then good job. Keep working though. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel and this video. And I'll see you next time. Bye.